This week in the field, answering your questions. It's a Q&A episode. Hi everybody, I'm Scott Davenport and welcome to In the Field. Answering questions today. A bunch of questions have come in over the last few weeks. I grabbed a couple and I want to talk about them here. So without delay, let's just dive right into it. First question is from Paul. This came up during my last San Diego Coastlines workshop. And the question is, how do you calculate the exposure time when you're shooting with a neutral density filter? So there's a couple of different ways to do it, but it always starts with you've got your camera and you do not have a filter on it at all. You want to meter your scene. And so we're just going to kind of do this live here, live in air quotes. I'm going to turn my camera on and just kind of meter something here. And it's telling me if I wanted to take this photo of the corner of my monitor in this particular light at the aperture I have selected, I would need to expose for 1 second. Okay, so 1 second with no filter at all. Now let's say, let me reach over here and we'll get a 4-stop filter. So let's say I want to use a 4-stop filter and slow things down. Well, we have a couple of choices. One is you can use an app. Now I'm going to fire up this app here. This one happens to be called Long Time. And what you do is you dial in the exposure time that your camera meters at without the filter. And then you dial in the amount of stops you need. In this case, it's telling me I need to stop for 15 seconds. Seems like a long time, but that's what it comes up with. And when we put the filter on, right, so slide it on in. Let's do that right there. I'd now switch into manual mode, dial in the same aperture that I was metering at, or if you're doing shutter priority, dial in that shutter priority, and then go. Well, actually, you probably wouldn't be doing shutter priority, would you? You'd only be doing aperture priority. You dial in the aperture, dial in the exposure from the calculator, and then go ahead and fire off the shot. So the apps are pretty good. It's very simple calculations. The thing is, sometimes the app doesn't have the exact settings that you would want. And so in this example, it happened to have 1 second. I've had cases where it would map in, or my camera would meter at, say, 1/320th of a second. And when I start scrolling through here, I don't have that. I can take a best guess. Or you can do a little basic math. So let me take the filter back out. There we go. And so as we said before, this metered and gave me 1 second on the corner of that monitor. Well, every time I cut a stop of light, I need to double the exposure time. So using this 4-stop filter, I need to cut 4 stops of light. I need to double 4 times. So from 1 second, I go to 2 seconds. From 2 seconds, I go to 4. From 4, I go to 8. And from 8, I go to 16. So my math comes up with 16 seconds. The app told me 15 seconds. We're in the realm of possibility. But that's how you can do a quick in-the-field calculation of what your exposure needs to be. And your camera can become really handy for that, because usually once you've moved into manual mode and you're dialing in your exposure, doing the different clicks on your wheels there, depending on how your camera's set up, it's either 2 clicks or 3 clicks to double an exposure, right? So I can do click, 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 double it, click, click, click again, and you can just start to count clicks. I don't even have to multiply by 2 if that's not your thing. Eventually, if you get into very long exposures, something over 30 seconds, where you're going into bulb mode, you got to do the math, or break out the calculator on your smartphone and do the math there. So that is how you calculate an exposure for using a big, thick neutral density filter. Our other question for today comes from Bill, and he asked, I struggle with filling the frame versus negative space. Can you help me out? So here's the thing. I struggled with this a lot too. What's the difference between negative space versus dead space? And at least how I came to resolve it is thinking about the subject of my photo. Does the absence of things in the photo add, emphasize, or draw the eye toward my subject? If that's true, that's negative space. That's a good thing. If the absence of things draw your eye away or detract from the photo, that's dead space, and that's a bad thing. I've got a few examples here, and this one here of this tree, I think of this as like, really filling the frame. The frame has a lot of things in it that are emphasizing the subject. My tree here, I've got a nice little path that leads up to it. There's a decent arc to the land that leads my eyes to it. There's clouds overhead that are kind of framing, another compositional technique, but framing that subject. So that's pretty okay. Here's another example of filling the frame. There's something interesting going on everywhere in this frame. Great color. The subject are these hills, and that's very clear. There's no doubt about that. Now, here's an example of a poor photo that I've taken where I tried to do this, negative space thing with this right-hand side of the frame, but it's really just dead space. There's nothing compelling about it. There's enough distracting things going on there that I'm pulling my eyes away from these rocks that I was really photographing. So this was a bad choice. This is a good choice, right? Solid subject, nothing else going on in the scene as far as visual interest. Lots of negative space, but my eye really comes back to this lump of seaweed. So this is a good example. Negative space. One more round. Some fog. Took this shot. This I consider dead space. Yes, there's some trees here, but it's not clear. My eye is confused. I don't know where I should be going. Compare it to this photo. Very clear, very crisp, great use of negative space. Everything emphasizes this lone tree in the fog. So I hope that helps Bill demystify filling the frame versus dead space, negative space. I think it really comes down to your subject. If you're emphasizing your subject, then you're going to be okay. And that is it for this week's Q&A episode of In the Field. Hope you have enjoyed it. If you did, share this with a friend, subscribe to the channel, tell your local camera club or other folks in your social media circles, your other photographer friends. And I'd like to hear from you. Please send in your questions. You can contact me directly through my website. Comments on the video are always welcome. And until next time, my name is Scott Davenport, and happy shooting.